I hired a billionaire stranger to play my fiancé for my sister's wedding to save face. Now we're stuck in a sapphire suite with rose petals on the floor, one king-sized bed, and a lie that's starting to feel way too real. The gold-embossed card felt like a ticking time bomb in my hand. My sister was getting married in Hawaii at a resort that cost more per night than my monthly rent. But that wasn't the problem. The real problem was the tiny, handwritten note tucked inside. "Can't wait to finally meet your fiancé, Ronald. I've booked the Sapphire Suite for you too." I felt the blood drain from my face. Ronald, my fiancé. A man who didn't exist, at least, not in the way my family thought. 2 years ago, in a moment of desperate insecurity at Christmas dinner, I invented a high-flying partner named Ronald to stop my mother's pitying looks. I thought I'd be broken up by now. Instead, I was 2 weeks away from a destination wedding with a ghost. I did the only thing a sane person would do. I went to a dive bar and told my problems to a stranger. That stranger happened to be Ronald Blackwood. He was sitting at the corner of the bar, looking like he'd just stepped out of a high-fashion magazine and into a noir film. Dark hair, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much, and a suit that cost more than my life. "You need a fiancé," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly vibration that made the ice in my glass rattle. "And I need a week away from a board of directors that's trying to skin me alive. I'll go. I'll be your Ronald." I looked at him, truly looked at him. He was intimidating, he was beautiful, and he was clearly dangerous in a way I couldn't quite define. "Why?" I whispered. "Because, Amanda," he said, leaning in until I could smell the expensive bourbon and cedarwood on his breath. "I think you're a terrible liar, and I've always enjoyed a challenge. 1 week, 1 room, 1 lie. Do we have a deal?" I should have said no. I should have come clean to my sister. But as I looked into those dark eyes, I realized I was already lost. I took his hand, and the spark that jumped between us was the first warning of the fire to come. The flight to Maui was 10 hours of polite tension. Ronald played the part of the doting fiancé perfectly in front of my parents at the airport, but the second the elevator doors closed at the resort, the mask slipped. He became cold, distant, and professional, until we reached the room. The Sapphire Suite was a masterpiece of romantic architectural cruelty. There were rose petals on the floor. There was a bottle of vintage champagne on ice. And in the center of the room, positioned perfectly under a canopy of white silk, was a single, massive king-sized bed. "One bed," Ronald muttered, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Of course there's only one bed." "I can sleep on the sofa," I offered quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It looks comfortable-ish." "Don't be ridiculous, Amanda," Ronald snapped, though his eyes weren't angry. They were focused on me in a way that made my skin itch. "We're supposed to be a couple. The maid service, your sister, your mother. They'll all be in and out of here. If they see a made-up sofa, the lie is over before it begins. We share the bed. We're adults." That night was the longest of my life. I stayed on the very edge of the mattress, terrified to move. But the bed was soft, and the smell of the ocean was intoxicating. In the middle of the night, I felt the mattress shift. Ronald moved in his sleep, his arm draping heavily across my waist, pulling me back against the heat of his body. He was like a furnace. I should have moved. I should have pushed him away. But for the first time in years, I felt safe. I fell asleep to the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against my back, wondering if the lie was already becoming something I didn't want to end. The rehearsal dinner was held on a private beach under a canopy of fairy lights. My sister, Chloe, was glowing, but her eyes kept darting toward Ronald. She was a lawyer. She smelled a lie from a mile away. "So, Ronald," Chloe said, swirling her wine, "Amanda tells us you're in private equity. That sounds intense. How did you two actually meet? She's always been so vague about the details." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. We hadn't rehearsed the meet cute. But Ronald didn't miss a beat. He reached across the table and took my hand, his fingers interlacing with mine so firmly it felt like a vow. "It wasn't a business meeting, if that's what you're wondering," Ronald said, his voice smooth as silk. "I saw her in a crowded bookstore on a rainy Tuesday. She was arguing with a clerk about a rare edition of Neruda. I walked up to help her, and she told me to mind my own business." He looked at me then, a smirk playing on his lips that looked entirely too real. I knew right then I was going to marry her. The table erupted in ahwas, and even Chloe looked convinced. But I was staring at Ronald. The detail about Neruda, I had that book in my purse. I'd been reading it on the plane. He'd been paying attention. He wasn't just playing a part, he was studying me. Later, as we walked back to the suite, the moonlight turned the sand to silver. "That was a good story," I whispered. "Where did it come from?" Ronald stopped walking and turned me to face him. The crashing waves drowned out everything else. "It wasn't a story, Amanda. I did see you in that bookstore 6 months ago. You were wearing a yellow raincoat and looking like the most beautiful, frustrated thing I'd ever seen. I didn't have the courage to talk to you then. So when you showed up at that bar, I couldn't believe my luck." My heart stopped. The lie wasn't just mine. He had his own reasons for being here, and they were far more dangerous than a family wedding. The next day was a couple's spa day, another gift from my mother that felt like a trap. Ronald and I were led into a private room for a side-by-side massage. The air was thick with the scent of eucalyptus and tension. As the therapists worked on us, the room fell into a heavy silence. "You're tense," Ronald murmured from the table next to mine. "I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop," I replied, my voice muffled by the face cradle. "My mother is already asking about wedding dates. Chloe is looking up your company records. This is going to blow up, Ronald." "Let it," he said. I heard him sit up, dismissing the therapists with a quiet word. Once they were gone, I felt him move to my table. His hands replaced the therapists', his palms warm and strong as they settled on my shoulders. "I'm not going to let them hurt you, Amanda. You think this is just about a lie, but you don't see what I see." "And what do you see?" I asked, turning over to look at him. He was looking down at me with an expression that shattered my heart. It was raw, vulnerable, and completely devoid of the billionaire mask. "I see a woman who is so afraid of being not enough that she invented a man to protect her. And I see a man who would give everything he owns to actually be that man for her." He leaned down, his forehead resting against mine. The proximity was overwhelming. I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. For a moment, the world stood still. He was going to kiss me. I wanted him to kiss me. But the door burst open, my mother, looking for us to join the family lunch. Ronald pulled away instantly, the mask slamming back into place. But the damage was done. The armor was cracked, and I was starting to realize that the fake fiancé was the most real thing in my life. Suspense is a funny thing. It builds in the quiet moments. That evening, while Ronald thought I was in the shower, I heard his voice through the bathroom door. He was on the phone, and his tone was nothing like the one he used with me. It was sharp, cold, and desperate. "I told you I need more time," Ronald hissed into the phone. "The board doesn't know where I am. If Julian finds out I'm in Hawaii, he'll move on the acquisition before I can get back. Just keep them distracted." A pause. "No, she doesn't know, and she's not going to know. This has nothing to do with her. I'm finishing this, and then I'm coming back to handle Julian personally." I stood frozen under the spray of the water. Julian. That was his cousin, the man who was trying to stage a coup at Ronald's company. Ronald wasn't just here for a vacation. He was hiding. He was using this wedding as a smoke screen for a corporate war. The bookstore story, the spa day, was it all just a way to keep me compliant while he handled his business? I walked out of the bathroom, my heart cold. Ronald was standing by the balcony, looking out at the sunset. He looked like the king of the world, but to me, he looked like a stranger again. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice steady despite the shaking in my knees. He didn't turn around. "Just work, Amanda. Nothing for you to worry about." "Don't lie to me, Ronald. I heard you. You're hiding from someone. Is that why you agreed to come? Because you needed a place to disappear where your board wouldn't look?" He turned then, and the look in his eyes wasn't guilt, it was regret. "It started that way," he admitted, walking toward me. "I needed a ghost, but then I met you, and the ghost became more important than the machine." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But in a world built on lies, how do you know which one is the truth? A tropical storm hit the island on the night before the wedding. The wind howled against the glass of the suite, and the power flickered and died, leaving us in a world of shadows and candlelight. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with the electricity of the storm and the unspoken words between us. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you the whole truth," Ronald said, sitting on the edge of the bed. The candlelight cast long, flickering shadows across his face. "I'm used to it," I said, sitting opposite him. "My whole life this week is a lie, Ronald. What's one more secret?" "This isn't a secret," he whispered, reaching out to touch my face. "This is the only thing I've been sure of in years." The tension that had been building since the bar finally snapped. He leaned in, and this time there was no mother to interrupt us. The kiss was fierce, desperate, and tasted like the storm outside. It was a release of all the fear, the lies, and the longing we'd been hiding. We made love that night while the rain lashed against the windows. It wasn't a business deal or a performance for my family. It was a slow, emotional surrender. Every touch felt like a question, and every breath felt like an answer. In the heat of his arms, I forgot about Julian, I forgot about the board, and I forgot about the wedding. There was only Ronald. The way he whispered my name against my skin made me believe that maybe, just maybe, we could survive the morning. But as the storm cleared, and the first light of the wedding day touched the room, a knock came at the door that changed everything. The knock wasn't the maid. It wasn't my mother. When Ronald opened the door, a man in a sharp gray suit was standing there, a laptop in his hand and a sneer on his face. Julian. "Nice place, Ronald," Julian said, pushing his way into the room. "The Sapphire Suite, very romantic. A bit expensive for a man whose accounts I just froze, don't you think?" I pulled the sheet up to my chin, my heart racing. Ronald stood his ground, his back to me, his posture like a shield. "How did you find me, Julian?" "You're not as invisible as you think, and your fiancé." Julian looked at me, his eyes cold and mocking. "She's a nice touch, very convincing, but the board isn't buying it. They think you've had a mental breakdown. They're voting this afternoon to remove you as CEO, citing unstable personal conduct." "Get out," Ronald said, his voice a low, vibrating growl. "Oh, I'm going. I just wanted to see the look on your face when you realized it was all for nothing. The girl, the wedding, the hiding. You lost it all, cousin." Julian turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "By the way, Amanda, did he tell you that if he marries you, he gets access to a trust fund that would save his company? It's a nice coincidence, isn't it?" The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was worse than the storm. I looked at Ronald, searching for a denial, a look of shock, anything. But he just stood there, staring at the door. "Is it true?" I whispered. "Is there a trust fund?" "Yes," Ronald said, finally turning to face me. "But Amanda, I didn't even know about the marriage clause until 2 days ago. I swear to you." 2 days ago," I repeated, the tears finally starting to fall. "The day of the spa, the day you told me you were watching me. You found out you needed a wife to save your empire, and suddenly you were in love with me. How convenient, Ronald, how perfectly timed." The day of the wedding was a blur of white silk and fake smiles. I felt like a ghost walking through a dream. I stood by Chloe's side as her maid of honor, watching her exchange vows with a man she actually loved. Every time I looked at Ronald, standing with the guests, my heart twisted. He looked devastated, but I couldn't trust my own eyes anymore. After the ceremony, during the reception, my mother pulled me aside. "Amanda, dear, you look peaky. Is everything okay with Ronald? He hasn't left your side, but you look like you're at a funeral." "I'm just tired, Mom," I lied, the millionth lie of the week. "Well, don't be too tired. Ronald had a long talk with your father this morning. He told him he wants to marry you here tomorrow. He said he doesn't want to wait another day." I nearly dropped my glass. He was moving fast, too fast. He was trying to secure the trust before Julian could finalize the board's vote. It was a chess move. And I was the queen being sacrificed. I walked away from my mother, heading toward the cliffs overlooking the ocean. I needed air. I needed to breathe. "Amanda, wait." It was Ronald. He was running after me, his tie loose, his hair windswept. He caught up to me at the edge of the cliff, the sunset turning the world into a bruised purple. "Listen to me. I don't care about the trust. I've already sent my resignation to the board. I gave Julian the company." I stopped. "You did what?" "I gave it to him. I signed everything over an hour ago. I don't have the billions, Amanda. I don't have the title. I'm just a man with a bookstore story and a lot of regrets. I didn't want the trust. I wanted you to know that if I ask you to stay, it's not because of a contract. It's because I can't imagine walking into that bookstore again and not seeing you there. The guests were still partying at the reception, but for us, the world had gone quiet. We stood on the cliffside, the salt spray on our faces. You gave up your company for me, I asked, searching his face. It wasn't for you, he said, taking my hands. It was for me. I've spent my whole life being the man the board wanted. I've been a shark, a ghost, a machine, but this week, being with you, sharing that room, even the rose petals, it made me realize I was starving. I don't want to be a billionaire, Ronald. I want to be the man who makes you feel safe. But the lie, I whispered. My family, they think we're already engaged. They think we're this perfect couple. Then let's give them the truth, Ronald said. He led me back to the reception, straight to the microphone where my father was about to give a toast. Ronald took the mic, his hand shaking slightly. The room went silent. I have a confession to make, Ronald said, his voice echoing through the marquee. My mother gasped, and Chloe stepped forward, her eyes narrowed. This week started as a lie. Amanda and we weren't engaged. I was a stranger she met in a bar who needed a way to help her through a family wedding. I'm not the man she told you I was. The murmur in the room was like a swarm of bees. My father looked furious, but Ronald didn't stop. He looked straight at me. But the lie ended the moment I saw her walk down the aisle today. I don't have a company anymore. I don't have a plan. But I have a ring that I bought in town this morning with the last of my personal cash, and I have a question. He dropped to one knee, right there in front of everyone. Amanda Miller, will you marry me? For real. No sweets, no trust funds, no lies, just us. The silence that followed was agonizing. I looked at my parents. My mother was crying, my father was stunned. I looked at Chloe, who was actually smiling. And then I looked at Ronald. He was trembling. The most powerful man I'd ever met was terrified of my answer. Yes, I whispered, then louder. Yes. The room erupted, not in the polite applause of a gala, but in real, chaotic cheers. My father stepped forward and shook Ronald's hand, a look of grudging respect on his face. My mother hugged us both, already planning a real wedding for the fall. We left the party early, walking back to the Sapphire Suite one last time. The rose petals were gone, replaced by the messy reality of our suitcases. We sat on the balcony, watching the moon reflect off the Pacific. So, I said, leaning my head on his shoulder, what happens now? You're unemployed. I think I'd like to open a bookstore, Ronald smiled, kissing the top of my head. A small one, with a very good section on Neruda, and maybe a corner where a woman in a yellow raincoat can argue with the clerk as much as she wants. I'd like that, I said. We had to share a room at the wedding as a couple, and it was the most terrifying, dishonest, and beautiful week of my life. We started with a lie to save my pride, and ended with a truth that saved his soul. As we tucked into that king-sized bed for the last time, I realized that sometimes you have to fake the life you want until you're brave enough to actually live it.